Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about Summer 19 for developers. So you can listen to this talk. You probably still need to go through release notes as well because they are preview, they keep changing. I think everything that I've put in here is still in the release notes. And every time I go back to release notes, I hear something else that I seem to have missed because more things are going in all the time, okay? So I'm trying to condense down 482 pages with a developer focus, and hopefully you'll find that useful today. So I want to talk about some of the declarative impacts, because while we're all coders, there are things that happen that either make your code obsolete, or that nice custom functionality you hand cranked 3 months ago is almost certainly now potentially no longer needed, or those Aura components you spent 3 or 4 years developing that you've now just gone and thrown in the bin. But it's called technical debt, and it's called good housekeeping. I'm going to talk about some of the other features that are coming up again that are going to be useful and compare them to some of the other developer ways of doing things. But I'm mainly going to focus on the Apex, Lightning, Aura, web component changes. So some of those things around field level security, change event triggers, which I thought was quite interesting, long running callouts, continuation classes, which I'd never even seen before, but looks quite exciting, and a very nice one around VF live updates, if you haven't seen that one as well. Also at the end, I'll just talk about retirement of an old friend, okay? So, declarative impacts. It's not my friend. First one I want to talk about is merge cases, which snuck in summer 19. So most people say, so what? You know, merge cases, so what? You know, we've had merge leads, merge accounts, it's nothing new. So how many of you have potentially written an Apex trigger on cases that's checking some business functionality, but it doesn't do a unit test on merge? Because you couldn't, okay? So you have to think about this. So it's a declarative change that's auto-enabled. That button will appear, well, it's appearing in Sandboxes at least. I assume it'll appear in production as well. So unless your admin removes it, your users will be able to start merging cases. So you need to think, is your functionality still going to work, okay? All those carefully crafted Apex classes, all that business logic, there's no way through, it's got to follow a correct process. Is that now going to break? Are you going to start doing things that you didn't expect? Equally, if you were wanting merge cases before, you had to write your own buttons for it. So those buttons now are potentially redundant. All that work, throw it in the bin. Okay, you don't need it anymore. Regardless of which of those you've done, so if you've got any case trigger, any Apex code around cases, even potentially if you want to use Apex to test process builder and flow, which I've seen, then you should be thinking about your unit test for that class, for that case trigger. So you need to cover that in a scenario of unit tests. It's not just about code coverage. There is an interesting article with the link on the screen there for triggers and merge statements help, which I'd never really bothered to read before. I always assumed there was a after merge and before merge event that could just catch on a trigger. It doesn't happen like that. So if you read the article, what it will talk about, the first thing it does is fire a before delete. This is a change in the order of execution. It's then going to reparent those child records that are being merged, okay? And then it's going to set the master record ID on those deletes. So those updates on those deletes may cause your other code to fire unexpectedly. It's then going to do the after delete on those merged records, and then your normal update processing will fire. So do be aware of that. Do check your code, it may catch you out. So if you're looking to write unit test, yet another piece of classic code written in, I've got my braces right this time, written in PowerPoint clearly. But the key point here, although it's terrible code, don't look at the SOCL statements at the top, is the merge statement. So you can put that merge statement in with 2 case objects to check that your code's behaving as you expect. Next declarative feature I want to talk about is enhanced related lists. So this is an interesting one because it's not auto-enabled. Okay, you have to go on every flexi page, or sorry, every edit page, and you have to enable it on each related list or related lists. Okay, so it means these enhanced related lists will appear inconsistent unless you go through every single one of them. Okay, and standard pages where you haven't hit edit page won't have enhanced related lists, so it can be a little bit confusing. Main thing here though, if we're in the app editor, when you click on your related list component, there's a list here, I think it's a standard list or enhanced list, or basic list and enhanced list, or tile of course. because that's helpful. So if you choose the enhanced list, you'll get some new features. So firstly, you can choose how many records to display, how many rows to display in that related list. So it's not just 5, so that's quite nice. You also can have up to 10 columns, but it doesn't squeeze them in. It makes a horrible scrolling area, okay? So you think, well, I can still only see 4, okay? But you can actually see 10. According to the release notes, you get text wrapping. Haven't seen that work, not yet. And you get mass action buttons. So you get the checkboxes down the side, and you get your buttons that weren't in Lightning suddenly reappear. All those buttons that you replaced when you went from Classic to Lightning that didn't work, so the custom button, are now back. So now you get 2 buttons. You've got your new button and your old button. So that's fun. And column sorting as well. So again, the impact there is you may have redundant code that you don't need anymore. You may have bought third-party libraries or Lightning components that had a better related list. You may have built your own, so you may have redundant code and JavaScript. If you have written your own, you've probably used Lightning Data Table, okay? Which, if you haven't checked it out, is really, really good, okay? So what Lightning Data Table does in addition is you've got inline edit. You've got filtering, you've got inline buttons, you've got infinite load, where you keep scrolling, it just keeps coming more records. So you've got all those options in Data Table. And you've got dynamic actions as well. So actions on the row will change according to the value of a status or some other field. So that's a really powerful feature in Lightning Data Table. So let's have a quick look at those. This could be fun if it doesn't get any bigger. Okay, so if I edit this page, I think I'm on the wrong app, best laid plans. Wow. Okay, and I do edit of this account page. Lightning fast. So, look, I really built it. Look at that. That's what happens when you don't practice your demo. So we've got one with a basic list here. So here's how you'd normally expect related lists to appear. You can't click on the column headings, okay? Can't do much with that. You've got some actions that are the same on every row, okay? So everyone can see that. If you switch that to be an enhanced related list, so now we've got some filter options. That's where the wrap text appeared. There we go, look at that. Okay, so I've got some options. I'm not sure about clipping. And I can filter on these, I can sort on these as well. And as you see, depending on my very large screen, I actually do get 10 columns. But for most of us, we have a view more like that most of the time. And if I have that, I can just scroll across to them as well.
How many users want to do that then?
Scroll across? Someone will, because they can't.
But the thing is, the scroll bar disappears when you're not scrolling,
Yeah.
so they don't even know you can do it.
Well, it's ugly when it's there, I think, but
Unless you see half the column somewhere in there.
you find it.
Is the sorting persistent?
I don't believe so, no. Pretty sure it doesn't, it's too fast for that.
On that screen you've got there, Richard, see where you've got the subject on the cases, you can see it's truncated. Can you just check the wrapping on that? Seems we've got a nice truncated field.
Yeah, it does work, I'm sure. It's just that that option wasn't there last time I tried, so that's quite sexy. And you'll see here as well, I've got things like, I've got a refresh button as well. So that's quite nice.
If you click view all, does the wrap stick?
No.
You lose it doesn't need to.
Don't mess the demo up, come on.
We have questions.
How many requests it takes?
And none. And the other thing you see are the multi-select, you can change order. The multi-select buttons have appeared, so add campaign, change owner, which normally aren't there, which you probably coded around. So hopefully that's given a little bit of an insight. And in terms of editing that, it is just as simple as going in edit page, going on the section you want to edit, onto the related list, and I say you've got to do it for each related list, which is quite tedious, and just change it to enhanced, okay? Pretty easy. Let's see if we can go back to my slides now.
I've loaded this forever.
So the other way of doing things is if you've used Lightning Data Table. For an example of Lightning Data Table, I don't need to write any examples because there's a lovely one in the component reference. So you can see here things like I can have static actions, infinite loading, and all of these are just attributes of your Lightning Data Table, so really easy to implement. And your users think you've done a load of code to implement it, so that's what I love about features like this. This is when components work, because you get a lot of credit and you've done sod all work for it. So yeah, if you haven't already looked at those, do have a look through and consider that inline edit, etc., which you don't get with the new enhanced, not so enhanced related lists. Okay, another feature that came in, and several features in summer 19, very much around for classic users, clearly, given them a migration path. So if you're not really aware, winter 20, Lightning gets auto-enabled in your orgs, so automatically everyone gets switched into it, and then you have to switch them all back out. So there are ways around that. So you can stop it happening. You can just make sure Lightning's not enabled at all. But if you've got Lightning enabled in your org, all your users will keep getting switched into it unless you switch it off.
Wasn't that only for standard license types, though, not custom? Sorry, not license, standard profiles.
It is for standard profiles. Initially, is what they announced in spring. We'll see what winter brings.
Right.
Who knows?
Stop lightning one.
So full record view is basically in. Here's an example. In normal Salesforce, you've got related lists are in a separate tab by standard. Full record view basically switches you, so you've got the lovely old, really long pages that Classic has, so all your related lists appear in a long scrolling list, if you like that. If you've been building that yourself, you don't need to anymore. So putting the Classic back into Lightning, there's several changes like this. It doesn't affect your custom Lightning pages. So if you've done edit page like I did, that's not going to change. Okay? So it doesn't change those ones because it's got a related tab. It treats it as a custom Lightning component, custom tab. I think it looks dated, all right? And it's a beta feature, which means if it doesn't work and you contact Salesforce support, they'll tell you it's not supported. Because none of us ever used beta features like custom settings years before they went GA. So it's really just there to help customers migrate from Classic. So I don't think we want to see a demo of that one. I think it's quite a boring one. Some more declarative stuff, custom metadata types. So now referenceable in Process Builder, so that's quite nice. Limits doubled from 100 to 200. Included in the system overview, so you can see how many you've used in terms of the capacity when you go into system overview in the setup, so that's quite nice. And then obviously a nod towards Amnon with Let It Flow. So Amnon did an amazing talk without the singing even. It was a good subject to talk about. I'm so glad I didn't present the same subject to talk about, which was what I was planning, on invocable methods, how you can call Apex from Process Builder. So within Summer 19, they've added support in Flow for complex data types. So if you had maybe a JSON object or something, previously you had to always go out to Apex. So they've reduced the number of times in effect that you need to do that invocable flow by putting more functionality into Flow itself, which seems really exciting. It's becoming more and more powerful since they've re-architected it. They've also added more debugging, God, it needed it. And they've added flow templates, which are quite nice. So sometimes you have the same flow, maybe you don't want to make it really complex and make it hundreds of elements, but you've got a certain pattern you want to use maybe. So the idea of flow patterns is something quite realistic now. You can create a flow template, create a new flow, rather than being a blank canvas, you start from that template. So I think that's quite interesting as well. Pick lists on external objects. When I looked at external objects, I thought that's great, but do you know what? No pick lists on this is painful. Now you can do them. And custom objects, 2,500 you can have now, including all packages. That's the maximum depending on your license type. So I think if you're on unlimited edition, you can have up to 2,500. I'm not sure where it is at enterprise and professional and whatever else.
Any change to maximum fields?
Not that I know of, that I've seen so far, but it could be in there hidden.
Oh, I've got Anthony's more than 700.
Yeah, so I had one with 500, we got them down to 403, I think.
Yeah.
We had 12 start date fields. Pre-me. Horror stories, that's a talk in itself, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
All horror stories. So now, obviously, half of you, at least the developers, you'll know all this stuff already, I'm sure. So there's a pilot feature And sometimes a Salesforce pilot feature is something you sign up for. Sometimes it's restricted in that you can only use it in Sandboxes, developer editions, and Scratch orgs. This falls into the latter case. So there's a new way of doing field level security in Apex. Previously, you could write what you like, and it all works fine in unit tests because you only ever unit test the system admin, let's be honest. Very few people are writing unit tests properly. So then it goes in production. Guess what? It's falling over everywhere because the fields aren't visible, the field level security is breaking, and you didn't do all the extra coding to check every single field before you displayed it. So what's happened within the pilot, at least, so I hope this will be coming very soon, is there's a new security and S-object access decision class. And from those, what you can do is you can do a strip inaccessible method, which will take out the fields that aren't visible to the current running user. And I'll show you an example in a second. But basically, it's going to avoid those DML exceptions. And you can use the S-object access decision to actually say, well, which fields did it strip out? So actually, your logging and reporting can be quite good as well. So you can bung those in your debug log, check you know what's going on. So if someone says, why is this field not on the page? You go, oh, it's because it didn't have field level security. Instead of checking all the different aspects, page layouts, field level security, permission sets, etc. So here I've got a query. I've got two opportunities being created. Opportunity 1, opportunity 2. On the second one, I've got probability field, which isn't always enabled for all users. People think that's weird, standard field. Of course everyone can see it. Well, actually, in some customers I've worked at, they don't enable things like probability field. They don't always enable forecast category, okay? And you might be relying on it as your boilerplate, well, I always do this. So what this will now do is if I use the security.strip inaccessible, it will take that list of opportunities and I'm asking it to check the creatable permission. And what it will do is strip out any fields that this user can't create. So I think that's quite cool. Now say there's a number of the result you get back, S-object access decision, there's a number of methods on it such as getting the records, getting the fields, etc., which makes it quite interesting for debugging.
Is that against a profile or any profile? Because if you've got a read-only user, then they can't create much.
No, so they wouldn't actually hit the new button though and go into that process.
But then would that stop all that stuff?
They wouldn't get to that point if it's a read-only profile. So your code, that's probably going to be called from an Apex trigger, which would never fire because they can't create the record in the first place. But if they can just create one field, it would mean they could go in and create a record with one field. What's going to be interesting is I did something in our own org today and used a platform license user, which didn't have access to the opportunity object, of course. So that opportunity lookup field, which I made required on my page layout, didn't appear. And so none of the validation was enforced for it. So watch out for things like that. So if fields aren't appearing, it still means people can create records that you consider bad or incomplete. Next item is long-running callouts, continuations, which a few people nodded at. And so if any questions, you can ask them. There was virtually nothing in the documentation about this, other than this nice tease that, oh, this looks good. Eventually I dug in and thought, well, this continuation's been around a while, hasn't it? What they're saying is continuations can now be used for long-running requests for external services from Aura or Lightning Web Components. I think before you could only do it from Apex, okay? It does not count towards the Apex 10 synchronous request limits, over 5 seconds, that's good. You can have a maximum of 3 callouts per continuation object, so that should be enough. But they are processed in sequence, so one at a time. So if you've got anything critical, it's probably not the way to go. But if you've got something where you say, just go and do it, okay, go away and do that, and I don't want to have to do it any other way, let's go and let that run, and eventually we'll get a result back, you can do that. And there are some restrictions around whether you can have DML or not. So at the point where you think, I've got a great solution, you write all the code, hit fire, and you realize you've got to re-architect everything. But if you're interested in continuations, I'm sure someone else will be able to answer the question on that one, or go to the release notes. This one I am excited about, change event triggers. So a lot of us have used things in the past. We used the streaming API and thought, that's not bad actually, I can see a use for that. It's a real pig's ear to work with though, especially when you're not doing it through JavaScript. Then we had things like platform events come out. Then there was things called change data capture. So change data capture was about being able to have an external system subscribe to when there's a change to a particular record, and that fires asynchronously. And it's quite easy to set up, and it's incredibly powerful if you haven't tried it already. I think Connor included in his MuleSoft demo a couple of months ago. So what we can do with change event triggers is have a trigger on that change. Now you might say, why do I need to do that? because I've got triggers already. Well, when you fire a trigger, say on opportunity, you may have some actions you perform that do not have to happen immediately, or do not have to happen to say that record can be updated. In that case, in the past, what you might have done is create future methods and do things asynchronously that way. This is a way of not having to do that, so you can have a change event and capture it within Salesforce itself using a trigger. I hope that's clear. So that's going to reduce your transaction time for those non-essential actions, because we know how slow the save button gets when people add 70 workflows on it and umpteen processes and everything else. They don't really, it's going to slow it down. Why is it 7 seconds? Salesforce is slow. Why have you got so many workflows? So it's an alternative to writing a at future, but it's always an after insert trigger. So there's no before insert on a change event. So it looks something like this. Trigger my account change trigger. On account change event, keyword is really important. Okay. If it's a standard object, it's in this format. Object name change event. If it's a custom object, it's the same as when you're doing it externally. It's the custom object name underscore underscore change event. So unfortunately the code you write is going to differ depending on that. Always after insert, you get trigger.new, you should know how to handle that. If you need to test that, which is my next question, I'm pleased that the documentation actually told me how to do it. If you need to test that, there's two things you need to do. First, test.enable change data capture. That means it's going to switch on change data capture for the objects you're using, rather than you having to rely on the setup, having gone in and said, oh, I want change data capture on opportunity or order or something like that. And then after you've done that, within your test case, you can then do a test.getEventsBusDeliver to actually fire those events so you control when those fire as well. So again, you control at which point you want to go check that those messages have been delivered. So we'll see what that works like in reality in a couple of months, I'm sure. Some other change data capture changes, custom channels, notification streams. It's been extended to more standard objects. There's quite a few already supported, but didn't do campaign member status and contract. Would have thought they were quite standard. If you need to know more about change data capture, there's a very good trailhead module, okay, where you go in and you set up a subscriber, they give you all the code, you get it running locally, and then you can actually see those changes happening and appearing in a log on your screen. It's quite a nice interactive trailhead rather than reading something and just doing a multiple choice quiz. There's also quite a lot in the CDC developer guide, so I think this is worthy of its own talk at some point. If anyone wants to volunteer, more than happy for them to do that. Someone other than Amnon, of course. So this feature I was really excited by and really surprised and massively disappointed when I found out you can't do it until at least June the 17th. So it comes back to the streaming subject. In the past, when we did projects together, I remember, up in the Midlands, and we had a Visualforce page and we wanted to display some information, and an external system was making an update to that information. I think it was a case record or some details being shared around a delivery. Yep. It was the packages, where the packages. Universe. Yeah. So, and we wanted to be able to show that, and we had to do our own streaming stuff, and it was really clunky. We hit lots of limits on the phone to Salesforce to get limits raised when it went in production. It's a bit of a nightmare. Apparently, we're going to have a new Apex command for Visualforce, Apex Live Controller, where you give it a list of the records. You can even give it an event to fire when it completes, and it's automatically going to refresh that component for you in Visualforce. Now I'm thinking, Visualforce not too bad, is it? I don't need to do this lightning stuff. So I thought that's going to be great, and I'm amazed that slipped through, but there we go. Some other interesting stuff, or I think it's interesting. If you're writing Aura, and this is quite important, if you're editing Aura class that you've already written, and you save, and you think, I didn't change, why is it failing? So there's some additional verification happening when you're writing Aura components, and it's going to potentially catch you out, and you may get a dodgy sort of failed, so-and-so is required. So be aware that there's some changes in the what's validated by Salesforce when you try and save an Aura class. Lightning Web Components can now be included in an Aura application, which they couldn't before. You could use them as a separate component, but not in an Aura app. You can use them with Lightning Out if you really want to. It's horrible. And equally, you can add them to a Visualforce page, which I pleaded with Salesforce not to do, because if you're in test automation, you know how bad and horrible iframes are, and putting Lightning Web Components in them just makes it even worse. But they've made that nice and easy, unfortunately. So I'm sure we'll come across those soon. Ooh.
But doesn't that consume more of your whole browser thing? Because that's brought down browsers of mine in the past.
Which
And Lightning
one?
components within Apex, within Visual Force pages.
Yeah, especially when people then nest it in another Visual Force page. So I've seen infinite iframes. It's just bad, but people still do it because it's easy. It's arguably a problem with component development that people don't realise always what they're doing and how many components they've created. So they've also added when you use Salesforce DX and you want to spin up a Scratch org, I think the pre-release one was already there, but a preview was there. You can now, or after Summer 19's in production, you'll be able to specify in your Scratch org, do I want the current release? Do I want the previous one? Or do I want the one that's in preview? So that's going to be interesting as well. So you'll be able to create those Scratch orgs without having to go and create a pre-release. I think that's quite powerful as well if you use Salesforce DX. Aura component form factors, we're getting near the end, don't worry. So we know in Winter 20 there's some changes happening to Salesforce Mobile, so it's no big secret about that. There's a pilot going on at the moment. Salesforce Mobile is becoming a lot more dynamic, caching more data, more buttons, more actions, more customizable. In preparation for that, they're allowing us to now specify in an Aura design component of the bundle. You can now say the form factor for an item if it's available in large or small, which means to most of us mobile or desktop. The reason I think they've used large and small is because an iPad is large, okay? It's not being treated as mobile anymore. So watch out for those. Equally in LWC, I couldn't bother try and cut and paste or retype this one, not with my terminating brackets and things. So again, similar thing, I can say large, small, large, where I target those configs for those components. So again, consistent, it's going to be interesting down the road. Some more interesting stuff, and this is nearly it. Critical update. This was actually in spring 19, but now I think it's been switched on before winter 20. Disable access to non-global Apex controller methods. Huh? So apparently, and I didn't know you could do this, or maybe I did, and I've got some code out there relying on it. If you have an Apex controller, okay, and you've got your methods on that, you've got your access modifier, private, public, global. If the Apex controller has a public method, and you try and call it from a Lightning component, maybe Git record, something like that, it lets you do it when it's someone else's component now, so it's not part of your package. I didn't know it let you do that. They've now clearly plugged that. So hands up if you think you might be relying on that somewhere. Is it just me? Seriously? You might want to check those. If you've extended anyone else's application, those people that worked with CloudSense before, we used to do this all the time, okay? So I'm hoping they were all made global. So yeah, keep an eye out for that one if you get some strange errors appear. Another thing is more on larger debug logs because they weren't big enough already. The haystack's even higher and the needle's the same size. So from instead of 5 meg, it can now be 20 meg. But I've got to say, I've been on those calls, you know, it's 2 AM, you're looking for something in production, log's truncated, how the hell am I going to find this? So that should make it easier, and they've increased the limits of the amount you can have per 15 minutes as well. Finally, the retirement I was talking about is Force.com IDE. So bye-bye Force.com IDE, okay? There are plenty of tools out there now that allow you to do deployments, plenty of tools that you do write code. So whether that's using VS Code or Illuminated Cloud, there's lots of good tools out there to do it as well. So in terms of Force.com IDE, from October, no new updates or patches. Well, not surprising. But the documents are going to start being withdrawn as well. So if you've said in your business we use Force.com IDE or Eclipse with the Force.com plugin, you need to change over before the winter, I think. And they're going to start archiving their source code. It will still run, but it's not going to get any updates. If you didn't realize already, that application is open sourced, so you can take a copy of it. So if you want, what you can do before they archive it is fork that if you want to continue developing it further yourself, if you're a sucker for punishment.
Has anyone ever tried building an Eclipse plugin? It's a bloody nightmare.
That's what we do.
You did it probably on a Commodore 64.
I can show you profile, Eclipse plugin. Yeah, it's hard. Any questions? Or any more questions, I should say. Okay, I'll take that as a no. Pizza time?
Yay.
Thank you very much.